in his tremendous classic expose of these star gods and deities called The Two Babylons, wrote this. He, of course, referred to that biblical quote that I mentioned to you. It's found in Isaiah. Baal boweth down, Nebo stoopeth, it says. And it says the word Nebo comes from Nibba, which means to deliver an oracle or to prophesy. In other words, a false prophet. So that NIBIRU would be a false prophet of God. I think that's pretty fascinating, don't you? By the way, NIBIRU was represented by the little horn. And those who worshipped this great god Nebo, or the star NIBIRU, wore a horn headdress. Isn't it interesting that Daniel talks about the little horn of the Antichrist in the last days? So we have the correlation here of NIBIRU, who was actually the god Nebo. Now, remember that Temple said that Osiris, the great sun god, and his son Horus are synonyms of Sirius, or the dog star. Now, it's interesting to me that when you go to study Osiris, you have the fact that he is often represented by the letter X. The letter X. Now, in Freemasonry, we have the jewel of a Knight of St. Andrew. That's one of the rituals of Freemasonry, if you get high enough. And there we have the X, the cross that is the X. The order of the Knight of St. Andrew is the X. Isn't it interesting that it is called Planet X that is headed for Earth? By the way, the invention known as the laser, which looks at all of your groceries when you go to the supermarket or the department stores. Here is a picture of the laser light scanner. You'll see this X, and then of course you have the bar coming down the midst of it. Isn't that very much like the spaceship that came down from outer space in the movie, the popular movie Independence Day? Is this a mistake? By the way, here is the Star of Life that you'll see, that same symbol with the serpent going up the rod or the pole in many medical facilities today. So, here again, we have the great god Osiris, who is NIBIRU, who is Horus, who is Sirius, all synonyms, of course, of Satan and the Antichrist. Here I have something very interesting. This is the Masonic Manual and Code of the Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Masons of Georgia. It's a little booklet they give out to people who are interested in learning more about Freemasonry. And guess what? It says in here that they always have an opening prayer to open their lodge ceremonies. And who is the God whom they pray to? They call him their most holy and glorious Lord God, the great architect of the universe. Here you see it in writing right here on the screen. The giver of all goods and graces. Who is this God? Who is he? They go a little bit later on in here to say his name is Osiris. Osiris is the God of Freemasonry. But there's more than that. Did you know, if we look at the Women's Encyclopedia of Myths and Secrets, edited by Barbara Walker, published by Harper and Row, she says, as Lord of Death, Osiris was sometimes identified with the great serpent of the underworld. Ah, now we have a full circle. Osiris, which is NIBIRU, or Nebu, is in fact the serpent of the underworld, the head of the serpents of wisdom. Now, we've talked about the many synonyms, the many names of Planet X that's coming. And I mentioned that in the book of Isaiah, it talks about Nebo, the Babylonian god Nebo, which actually represents the star god or the planet NIBIRU. The same one mentioned, of course, by Zechariah Sitchin, that is headed on an elliptical orbit and headed for Earth sometime in the future. I mentioned also the planet Saturn. Now, I want you to understand something about Saturn. You're going to be hearing more and more about it in the coming days. Saturn is the sixth star, or the sixth planet from our sun. Remember that number 6. The ancients say that many thousand years ago, Saturn was the brightest star. The brightest star. Now we see Venus as the brightest. But they say Saturn was one time the brightest. But a great catastrophe, perhaps a supernova explosion, occurred in the sky. And Saturn began to fall back. He became lord of the underworld in the pagan mythologies. But many say someday, when NIBIRU, or Planet X, comes forth again, there will be another great explosion in the stars, and the planet Saturn will be reignited. And in his great fiery glory, he will come forth again, and he will become a second sun. It is interesting to me that Arthur C. Clarke, the man who gave us 2001: A Space Odyssey, 2010, in his third sequel, 2060, does talk about this second sun that will arise. And it's interesting that he gives a name to that second sun that is to come. The name? Lucifer. Lucifer. How very fascinating. The sun god. Not too long ago, I was at a New Age occult bookstore and I came upon this book called Solar Man. The man who wrote it was one of the top members of the World Federalist. He talks about we're going into an intergalactic age. There will be one world. All the nations will come together and man will become solar man. Here's a book I read about the ancient secret, fire from the sun. I began to read the ancient Masonic literature, the ancient Babylonian, Egyptian text. I found out, for example, that Saturn is the hidden mystery. It is. The one who represents Saturn is Satan, or Lucifer, the dragon, the serpent. Saturn is the unknown god of the ancients. He it is who will come again and be our second sun. But it is said he will be reignited. He will be caused to be on fire by Sirius, by the planet Sirius, or NIBIRU, which perhaps broke off from the planet. It is that invisible star, the second satellite that once orbited Sirius, but now is headed for Earth again, according to the various occult views. Now let's go to some illustrations of this great sun god, also known as the sun behind the sun, or Saturn. See, many people talked about worshiping the sun god in ancient times when they actually worshiped the god Saturn. The god Saturn. He was called the grand central sun, or the sun behind the sun, the hidden god of mystery. Here we have in Hislop's book, The Two Babylons, we have some sun worshippers. Here in ancient Egypt, we have the great goddess worshiping the sun. Here's some modern symbols of, you might say, sun worship. Here's a Whole Life Expo and some other symbols you see in the New Age today. Then we turn to Saturn. Saturn is interesting, is also known as Cronus, and the word chronology comes from him. He is the father time. You know, every year about New Year's time, we talk about the one who comes, the old man going out, and then the little baby comes in. That old man comes with a sickle. He's also the father of time and the father of death. He's the Lord of death, and he comes with a sickle to collect those who are to die. Notice, in this ancient drawing, we see Saturn, the old man, with his sickle, and there he is with the dragon. Here, from a book entitled Art and Symbols of the Occult, is the old man, the grand man of Zohar, Saturn. Do you see the rings around him? Well, of course, the planet Saturn is very spectacular in the heavens because it's the planet that has the rings around it. And here we have the god of rings. Notice too, this Ouroboros, this serpent wrapped around this triangle, is another sign of Saturn. The triangle representing the old unholy trinity. And there we have the serpent, the ring around Saturn. Here is a symbol, the point inside the circle, also represents the great sun god, Saturn. This is a very popular Masonic symbol. Isn't it interesting that the Dogon tribe of Africa, remember they're the ones that somehow inexplicably came up with the astronomical information about Sirius and its satellite? Here we